Good afternoon, industry partners. If you've looked at the overhaul FAR 12, you'll notice the immediate change from its legacy version. Most notably that many aspects of the old FAR 13 have been shuffled in. FAR 12 is no longer sort of a limbo part that always needs a sidekick to support it. It's now a completely standalone FAR part that includes specific procedures for contracting professionals to use when ordering commercial products and services. Though not explicitly stated, there are essentially three categories of commercial purchases described in the overhauled FAR 12. Purchases below or equal to the simplified acquisition threshold, or SAT, which is currently $250,000. Purchases between the SAT and $7.5 million, which, if you're taking notes, is an important threshold to remember. And actions exceeding $7.5 million. There are a couple of new faces in the FAR 12 crowd, most notably that construction requirements are now treated as commercial services, and a really explicit focus on the concept of quotations. There are also some familiar faces as well, like the government preference for fixed-price commercial contracts, that are still with us and even more pronounced than they have been in the past. Again, some of the language we see should be pretty familiar from the legacy FAR Part 13, but its inclusion in FAR 12 is really important and considerably different, particularly for those actions below $7.5 million. Told you that number was worth jotting down. FAR 12 includes specific procedures for all commercial actions below $7.5 million, which it calls simplified procedures. Procedures that involve contracting offices issuing requests for quotations or RFQs. I'll get into some of the specific procedures that will be pretty massive departures from what you are used to shortly, but at a high level, these changes are meant to simplify the acquisition process when the government purchases commercial products and services, allowing federal contracting shops to shorten the time needed to award commercial purchase orders or other contracts, to streamline the process for solicitation, evaluation, and award for commercial actions, and to simplify the acquisition process overall for both industry and government when it comes to commercial requirements. Before we get into specifics of the thrilling new additions to Part 12, let's look at things that are no longer with us in the overhauled part. Aside from being generally shorter with a focus on plain language, clauses and provisions have been a noticeable target for reduction during the RFO process. A total of 46 provisions and clauses have been removed from across the FAR that once applied to commercial purchases, including the elimination of the provision at 52.212-3 and the clause at 52.212-5. This reduced the total number of clauses that apply to commercial acquisitions from 156 to 108. This ultimately means are fewer requirements to flow down to subcontractors and fewer reporting requirements when performing work on federal commercial contracts. To help with the transition from the legacy FAR 12 to the overhauled version, GSA is developing tools that members of the acquisition workforce can use to help ensure that only those provisions and clauses that are specifically applicable to the requirements that they are working are included in commercial purchase orders. These changes will reduce the administrative burden of complying with terms and conditions dramatically for industry and government, and support the overall RFO effort to streamline and simplify processes when doing business with GSA. So finally, the really good stuff here. I'm going to cover what I believe are the biggest changes that you can anticipate as a result of the overhauled FAR Part 12. I mentioned earlier there are three new categories of commercial purchases between the micro purchase threshold and the SAT, between the SAT and $7.5 million, and exceeding $7.5 million. The main focus of this discussion will be the first two categories, all actions at or below the threshold for what FAR 12 now calls simplified procedures. The FAR now directs that all actions below $7.5 million be issued as requests for quotations or RFQs, and leans very heavily on the difference between a quote and an offer or proposal in framing what is permissible with respect to soliciting and evaluating quotes. It advises that quotes are not offers and reminds us that when dealing with quotes, the purchase orders the government provides to suppliers represents its offer to purchase products or services, including the terms and conditions affecting that purchase. The simplified procedure's biggest impact to the commercial requirements is seen with respect to the evaluation process. The FAR now requires acquisition professionals to evaluate quotes in an efficient and minimally burdensome fashion, and grants contracting officers broad discretion in establishing how quotes will be evaluated. It explicitly encourages COs to stop using evaluation plans, scoring systems, and competitive range determinations, while encouraging the use of comparative evaluations of quotations to select suppliers for contract award. This represents a pretty massive departure from the evaluation process that most contracting shops have used with respect to commercial products and services historically, where processes very similar to those used in negotiated actions were common in most commercial acquisitions. As a result of the new FAR 12 simplified procedures, you can expect to see a significant increase in the use of RFQs and a dramatic change in the evaluation process for actions below $7.5 million, all anticipated to simplify and make efficient the acquisition of commercial products and services, including construction. Timely submission and acceptance of late quotes is the next massive change resulting from the RFO with respect to commercial products and services. Gone are the days of contracting officers working with IT staffers to determine what time an email hit the server to determine whether to accept or reject an offeror's proposal with respect to commercial requirements. This change is mentioned in FAR 12, but it's the provision at 52.212-1, paragraph C, paragraph 2, where we see the real detail. It now indicates that while an offer received after the time specified for receipt of offers is quote-unquote late, it now can be considered by the contracting officer, provided it is received, 1, prior to award, and 2, the contracting officer determines that accepting it will not unduly delay the acquisition. The provision does still allow for the late receipt of any modification to a successful offer that makes its terms more favorable at any time as well. While this change may not be quite as impactful as the updated evaluation procedures in Part 12, it represents a dramatic difference in the way that quote-unquote late offers are handled by government contract offices. And finally, let's discuss the post-award notification changes under the RFO, specifically for those actions at or below $7.5 million. When the simplified procedures under FAR 12 are used, meaning the government issued an RFQ, the government will provide a brief explanation to unsuccessful quoters upon request. The explanation will address why the quoter was not selected, and if award notice is not required, which according to the new FAR Part 5 means that your award is either less than $25,000 in value, not covered by the World Trade Organization Government Procurement Agreement or Free Trade Agreements, or unlikely to result in some contract awards, the contracting officer will provide the information that would be included in an award notice: a description of what was purchased, the address and name of the contracting office awarding the contract, the name of the contractor who received the award, the dollar amount of the award, and the award date. Yes, I did not discuss commercial actions exceeding $7.5 million. The new FAR Part 12 calls this category other procedures, and these represent acquisitions where FAR 12 does not stand alone. This category of requirements will need to be accomplished in tandem with either FAR Part 14 or 15. And while FAR 12 still mandates that commercial policies and procedures take precedence when any disagreement arises in another part that may be used with Part 12, the solicitation, evaluation, and post-award notification sections of FAR 12 do defer to either Part 14 or 15 for actions exceeding $7.5 million. You are likely to see greater use of the combined synopsis solicitation format for commercial actions over $7.5 million. Fewer provisions and clauses, as these are still commercial products and services, and the application of the new handling of quote-unquote late offers, as well as contracting professionals begin to use the overhauled FAR 12 for other procedures. But the upcoming revisions to Part 14 and 15 are likely to be even more impactful with respect to the solicitation, evaluation, and award of these actions as those parts are released. And now to discuss the practitioner resources for FAR 12, I'd like to welcome back Monica. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chris. All right, so the FAR Companion for Part 12 contains several best practices for the practitioner to consider. And so, for example, further guidance on understanding commercial products and services. So the objective here is to ensure that what the government is buying truly reflects what's available in the commercial marketplace under similar terms and conditions. And one of the important things I really like to say here is that we know that we cannot operate in a silo. And so the FAR companion is encouraging communication with industry all throughout. And so some other examples within FAR Part 12, modular acquisition strategies. This approach can open competition to vendors who excel in specific areas rather than requiring contractors to master every aspect of a complex system. Also, you'll find best practices when using BPAs, the use of those. And then one last item I'll cover in the FAR companion that I think is really important to both the acquisition workforce and our industry partners is the strategic management of award notice. And so this encourages the acquisition team, led by the contracting officer, to prepare quickly to provide debriefings when requested, after making award decisions and notifying unsuccessful offers. So these are ultimately designed to heighten the acquisition workforce, focus on industry engagement, and sharpen our strategies. So I'm talking about that feedback loop, so it's really important as we get that. Now, in the Practitioner album for FAR Part 12, there was a practitioner perspective to implementing the revolutionary FAR overhaul under Part 12. And so we refer to it as the Practitioner 101. So there was a video and a downloadable job aid. So highly encourage you to watch the video and download that job aid when you go to download the FAR companion today. So some of the items I've already covered, highlighted by Chris. The video and the job aid provide an overview of the regulatory changes and non-regulatory resources. So for example, that simplified acquisition, simplified commercial procedures up to 7.5 million, FAR Part 13 moved. And so the job aid emphasized this. FAR Part 12 it's a one-stop shop for all commercial simplified procedures. There was also that emphasis that FAR Part 15 procedures do not turn a simplified acquisition up to 7.5 million into a FAR Part 15 procurement. These very items, again, are to empower the acquisition workforce to use their discretion, but at the very same time, use of these streamlined procedures help lower bid and proposals costs, especially within these dollar values. In the smart accelerators, and as you saw in the FAR companion, you actually see an accelerator for understanding that commercial products and services, sharing the why, the benefits, how, encouraging best practices such as during market research, discussing early whether minor or major modification to a product will be needed to meet the government needs, right? So we're encouraging that engagement and that early interaction. And then the impact. It also provides a real use case from a federal agency. And so the Practitioner album also provided emphasis on previous acquisition techniques, on the periodic table acquisition innovation, and previous smart accelerators. Also, there were some other resources there, such as the DoD guidebook for acquiring commercial items, and a DAU, Defense Acquisition University, commercial acquisition resource tool as well. So the Practitioner album for FAR Part 12 provided both non-regulatory resources for the practitioner, but was really also written with industry in mind and the partnership that results in better awards. And so, Michael, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thanks, Monica. We're going to stick with you for the first question. Consistency of acquisition procedures would clearly be well received by our industry partners, but many, this is according to the questions we received, are worried about each agency adding its own unique agency-level policies, even with the issuance of the FAR companion or other non-regulatory guidance. What will prevent this duplication and possible relayering of disparate policies across the government?
Yes, so the FAR companion is designed to create an agile and efficient government-wide resource to highlight and evolve acquisition practices to reduce the amount of guidance needed for the agencies. So the OMB implementing memo provided that further direction to agencies regarding agency-specific regulations, policy, and procedures of reducing those. So OFPP will continue to work with the agencies and in line with updating the FAR companion and that category management guide. So that is still ongoing, and that OFPP memo also provides some information as well.
Well, thank you, Monica. And now, Chris, with construction services, now commercial services under FAR Part 12, can agencies procuring construction services seek cost buildup and indirect cost breakouts from offerors?
Yeah, the definition of commercial service in the overhauled FAR 2 now specifically includes construction. removing any previous complexity and gray areas. While FAR 12 maintains a preference for fixed price contracts and still restricts the use of cost reimbursement contracts for commercial requirements, contracting officers are still required to determine contract prices are fair and reasonable. Contracting officers are not preempted from seeking cost buildups or indirect cost breakouts for construction projects in order to support such a price reasonableness determination. This information would not be considered certified cost or pricing data.
Thank you, Chris. Monica, we've received some kudos for the video included in the FAR Part 12 Practitioner album. And if anyone in the audience doesn't know what I'm talking about, you're missing out. Go check out that video on acquisition.gov when you get a chance. There was a still of it on the previous slide. But Monica, because that video was so great and because people liked it so much, they're wondering, will there be more videos produced and shared?
Yes, so we definitely will likely develop and share additional videos as additional FAR parts with significant changes are released or post, the release of deviations as a part of the ongoing workforce development and knowledge sharing, right? There's that other piece of the workforce development as well. And so these videos, thank you for those who have watched it. Please, please do take a look at it. These videos are meant to complement the other resources being provided to the acquisition workforce, such as RFO workshops, FAI, DAU, co-sponsored office hours, and a recently stood up FAR Forward Alliance community of practice, coaching, and more. So a lot of different resources that are available to the practitioner, and we'll continue to possibly likely develop additional videos and things of that nature.
Wonderful, Monica. I know that there is a lot of resources out there already, and we're continuing to develop more. So thank you for highlighting some of that. Okay, Chris, I've got a super specific question for you. Good luck. There is some language that could be read as an expansion of what is considered non-commercial. And so I'm quoting from that definition now. Any previously developed item of supply used exclusively for governmental purposes by federal agency, by a state or local government, or by a foreign government with which the United States has a mutual defense cooperation agreement. End of the quote. So what's the purpose of this addition to the definition of non-commercial?
Yeah, this question really comes down to the age-old quandary of what is a commercial product or service. The answer shows up in FAR 2, but remember that a commercial product or service is one that is sold or offered for sale in the commercial market. It's available for use with or without minor modification by the federal government. It's developed at private expense and previously purchased by state or local governments, and if not immediately available for purchase, able to be produced in sufficient time to meet federal delivery requirements. Put simply, a commercial product or service exists in the known universe and is available for purchase both inside and outside the government. The language here indicates something very similar to GOTS, or government off-the-shelf software. And that's something that is developed by the government at government expense for the exclusive use of the government and is never considered commercial. I don't believe this language represents an expansion of what is considered non-commercial, a simply language that explicitly clarifies the difference between what is or is not commercial.
Thank you very much, Chris. I'm sure we will be debating what is commercial and what's not for years and years to come. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Monica, for your wise words on 12. And before I introduce the next person, I'm going to remind everyone that the slides are going to be available on GSA.gov along with this recording as soon as we can. A link to the spot on GSA.gov where you can find those is in the chat. All right.